The technicians scattered as Jax, Corbin, strode toward his racing pod, their faces tight with a mixture of admiration and pity. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. This was suicide with extra steps. "Final systems check," Jax announced, more to himself than the techs who were already backing away. The death track had that effect on people. The closer you got to it, the more your instincts screamed to run the other way. The pod gleamed under the arena's harsh lights, stripped of all non-essential components. Where other racers added layers of temporal shielding and probability dampeners, Jax had removed them. His craft was a naked nerve ending, exposed to the raw chaos of the track. "Temporal stabilizer offline," the pod's AI announced in its clinically neutral voice. "Good," Jax replied, running his hand along the craft's sleek hull. "Pilot sanity questionable," the AI added. Jax laughed, the sound echoing hollowly in the cavernous staging area. "That's been offline for years." As he climbed into the cockpit, the small hollow cube in his pocket pressed against his thigh. He didn't need to look at it anymore. Mira's face was etched into his memory more permanently than the image stored in the device. His sister's smile, frozen in time 3 years ago, before the accident. Before he'd ignored her call while he was busy with another emergency rescue. Before her shuttle had lost power in the Ganymede corridor. Before he'd failed her. The cockpit sealed with a pneumatic hiss, and Jax felt the familiar calm of pre-race isolation wash over him. Here, surrounded by controls and readouts, everything made sense. Every problem had a solution. Every danger could be quantified, even if the numbers were terrifying. "Race commences in 3 minutes," announced the trackmaster's disembodied voice, reverberating through the pod. 16 competitors, 1 finish line, unlimited probability variance. Jax ran through his pre-flight sequence, muscle memory taking over as his mind drifted. 3 years of increasingly dangerous races had led to this, the death track. No human had ever completed it. Few species had. Those who survived were granted one true answer to any question they posed. One true answer about Mira's final thoughts. That's all he wanted. The staging area's massive doors began to part, revealing not the track itself. That wouldn't materialize until the race began, but the swirling, impossible geometries of the probability storm that would form it. Reality itself seemed to fracture at the threshold, light bending around the edges of what normal space-time could contain. "Race commences in 60 seconds. Jax's gaze swept over the other competitors. Most were encased in vehicles that barely resembled racing craft, more like mobile fortresses against temporal paradox, crystalline structures, biomechanical shells, and one craft that appeared to be nothing but intricately folded light. And then there was Voran Kess, 5-time champion, whose black pod bristled with cybernetic implants that seemed to pulse with hungry anticipation. The Drovasi champion had mastered the psychological warfare of the death track, using his neural enhancements to project crushing despair into his opponents. "Race commences in 30 seconds. The probability storm began to coalesce, tendrils of raw potentiality reaching toward the starting line. Most pilots would aim for the edges, where reality was more stable. The center, where the storm's heart pulsed with an almost malevolent awareness, was suicide. Jax's hands tightened on the controls. The center was exactly where he was headed. "Race commences in 10 seconds. His heart rate remained steady, even as warning lights flashed across his console. Without the temporal stabilizer, his craft would experience all moments simultaneously. Without the psychic dampeners, his mind would be exposed to every competitor's thoughts. Without the probability anchors, his very existence might fragment across countless alternate timelines. 5, 4, 3. Jax closed his eyes, picturing Mira's face. 2, 1. "I'm coming for answers," he whispered. "Race commences now." The world exploded into impossible color as reality itself gave way. The death track had begun. The moment the probability storm engulfed his craft, Jax felt his consciousness fracture. Part of him was still in the cockpit, hands steady on the controls as he accelerated toward the heart of the storm. But other versions of himself flashed through his awareness like strobe lights. Jax who never left Earth. Jax who answered Mira's call. Jax who died instead of her. Jax who became an accountant, a father, a corpse, a memory. Probability of craft dissolution, 87.3%, the AI reported, its voice stretching and compressing like taffy. Jax pushed the throttle further, aiming straight for the writhing center of the storm. Around him, other racers were already beginning to swerve toward the safer peripheries, where reality maintained at least some consistency. Probability of craft dissolution, 93.8%. The controls bucked beneath his hands, reality itself rejecting his intrusion into its most chaotic regions. The storm howled with voices that might have been the wind, or might have been the screams of all his possible deaths. Probability of craft dissolution, 99.7%. Jax laughed, the sound torn from his throat. "Not good enough odds," he shouted over the cacophony. "I need certainty." The heart of the storm loomed before him, a nexus point where all possibilities collapsed into a singularity of pure chance. No racer had ever struck it directly and remained intact, temporally, physically, or psychologically. Warning, temporal fracture imminent, pilot sanity critical. The memories hit him like physical blows. Mira's 10th birthday, the time they snuck onto the colony's roof to watch the meteor shower, her graduation, her coffin. And then the memories that weren't his, the ones that never happened. Mira growing old. Mira having children. Mira hating him in her final moments for not answering when she called for help. That last one sliced through him like a blade of ice. Was it real? Was it just the storm toying with his guilt? The uncertainty was worse than any answer could be. Through the chaos, a glint of something caught his eye. Another racer's pod. But it was wrong. Fragmenting across timelines, existing in multiple states simultaneously, its pilot clearly in distress. The craft was smaller than most, its translucent shell revealing the silhouette of its occupant. The keeper of fading stars. He recognized the species, chronovores. They were sometimes called, creatures who experienced all of time simultaneously, whose consciousness flowed in streams rather than linear moments. The keeper's pod was breaking apart, shattering across a dozen different potential realities. In some, it was already nothing but debris. In others, it struggled onward, trailing temporal distortion like blood in water. Jax's emergency response training kicked in before he could think twice. He banked hard, redirecting toward the failing craft, even as his AI protested. Warning, course deviation increases probability of dissolution to 99.94%. "Shut up and prep the emergency caller," Jax snapped, his fingers dancing across the controls as he maneuvered toward the disintegrating pod. This was madness. Sacrificing his race position, possibly his only shot at finishing the death track, for a competitor. And yet he couldn't look away, couldn't ignore someone in danger, even here, even now. The keeper's pod phased in and out of existence as Jax approached, sometimes solid, sometimes nothing but ghostly outline. He had to time this perfectly. "Emergency caller ready," the AI confirmed. Jax waited, watching the rhythm of the keeper's pod as it pulsed between states of reality. There, a pattern. 3 seconds solid, 2 seconds ghost. Repeat. He counted down silently, then fired the emergency caller in the split second before the pod would rematerialize. The caller, a ring of temporal stabilizers designed for space rescue operations, expanded in flight, then contracted around the keeper's pod just as it phased back into solid reality. The effect was immediate. The pod stopped its erratic shifting, locked into a single time stream by the caller's influence. Through the translucent shell, Jax could see the keeper, a being of shimmering light and shadow, its form constantly flowing like liquid mercury. Temporal lock established, the AI reported. Warning, psychic interference detected. Jax felt it the moment the connection formed. A tendril of consciousness that wasn't his own, brushing against his mind with curious tendrils. The Keeper, reaching out. Gratitude, surprise, question. The thoughts weren't words, exactly, but impressions that bloomed in Jax's mind like ink drops in water. "You're welcome," Jax replied aloud, unsure if the Keeper could hear him through the hulls of their respective craft. "Now, stay close. We're still in the heart of the storm." Agreement, warning, sharing. A flood of awareness crashed into Jax's consciousness. The Keeper's perception of the storm, not as chaos, but as patterns. Intricate, multidimensional, but patterns nonetheless. And within those patterns, paths, ways through the heart that minimized temporal distortion. "You can see it," Jax breathed, understanding dawning. "You can see all of it at once." Affirmation, teaching, urgency. Using the Keeper's insights, Jax adjusted his course, weaving through the probability storm's core in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The AI's warnings of dissolution dropped from 99.94% to 75%, then lower still. They emerged from the heart of the storm together, Jax's craft and the Keeper's tethered pod, into a region of the track where reality reasserted itself just enough to be navigable. Ahead lay the first true obstacle of the death track, the shearing plains, where space itself split into razor-thin layers that could slice a racing pod to ribbons. "We made it through the storm core," Jax said, a note of wonder in his voice. No racer had ever done that before. They all skirted the edges, where survival was at least possible. Correction, amusement. The impression that flowed from the Keeper's mind was clear. This was only the beginning. Before Jax could respond, a shadow fell across his pod. A massive black craft pulled alongside him, its hull bristling with neural interfaces that seemed to reach toward him like hungry fingers. Voran! The champion had noticed their unexpected survival and was moving to eliminate the threat. "Psychic attack imminent," the AI warned, just as Jax felt the first cold probe of Voran's consciousness against his own. The assault hit like a battering ram. Not subtle manipulation but brute force trauma to his psyche. Images flooded Jax's mind. Mira's final moments, gasping for air as her shuttle's life support failed. But these weren't memories. They were Voran's fabrications, designed to maximize pain and distraction. Mira, clawing at the shuttle's communication panel. "He's ignoring me," she gasped to no one. "My own brother. He knows I'm dying and he's ignoring me." "Lies." Jax gritted through clenched teeth, fighting to maintain control of his craft as it entered the shearing plains. She didn't die like that. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. How did he know? He hadn't been there. He'd been too busy with another rescue, too important to answer a routine call from his sister. Protection, connection, request. The Keeper's consciousness pressed against his, offering shelter from Voran's assault. Jax hesitated only a moment before allowing the connection to deepen. The world transformed. Suddenly, he wasn't experiencing just this moment. He was experiencing all moments simultaneously, as the Keeper did. Past, present, future, possibilities, all laid out like threads in an infinite tapestry. He could see the path through the shearing plains, not as a series of split-second decisions, but as a single, continuous movement through space-time. And he could see Voran's deceptions for what they were, crude manipulations that existed only in this moment, with no roots in the past and no branches into the future. "Thank you," Jax whispered, guiding his craft through gaps in the shearing plains that he couldn't possibly have seen without the Keeper's perception. Behind them, Voran's massive craft was forced to slow, unable to navigate the tight spaces with its bulky neural arrays. The champion's frustration radiated like heat, a psychic pressure that pushed against their shared consciousness, but couldn't penetrate. For the first time since Mira's death, Jax felt something like peace, not because his guilt had vanished, but because he could see it as just one thread in a vast pattern. Important, yes, but not all-consuming, not the whole of who he was or could be. The Keeper's pod pulsed with light, its temporal stability still dependent on Jax's emergency caller. They were bound together now, at least until the race ended, or until they did. Ahead, the third phase of the death track manifested, tomorrow's graveyard, where holographic tombs displayed the most probable deaths of each racer. Beyond that lay the memory maze, a psychic labyrinth constructed from the racers' own regrets and fears. No human had ever made it past the memory maze. Few species had. Determination, companionship, hope. Jax nodded, feeling the emotion resonate through their shared consciousness. Together, then, he said, and accelerated toward the challenges ahead. Tomorrow's graveyard materialized like a nightmare-given form. Holographic tombs stretched to the horizon, each displaying a death more gruesome than the last. Some showed Jax's pod crushed to atoms. Others, his body aging to dust in an instant, as temporal acceleration claimed him. One particularly vivid projection showed him alive but mindless, trapped in a loop of the same 5 seconds for eternity. But what chilled him most were the tombs that showed peaceful ends. Jax, dying in his sleep decades later, surrounded by family he didn't have. Those weren't threats. They were temptations. Promises of what might be if he abandoned the race now. Don't look at them, he told himself. But it was impossible not to. The graveyard was designed to break racers psychologically, to make them question whether any prize was worth such risk. Perspective, offering truth. The Keeper's consciousness expanded within their shared mental space, showing Jax something he hadn't considered. Every species experienced death differently. The holographic tombs were attempting to frighten him with human perceptions of death, but they meant nothing to the Keeper, whose species experienced all moments of their lives simultaneously, including death. To the Keeper, these projections were just data, neither frightening nor enticing. Jax latched onto that alien perspective, using it to steady himself as they navigated through the field of prophetic tombs. His craft hummed beneath him, responding to controls that he operated on instinct, while his mind remained partially merged with the Keeper's. They were making good time, better than good. They were on pace to break records, if they survived. The thought had barely formed when Varan's black craft emerged from the probabilistic murk behind them, moving with impossible speed. The champion had taken a different route through the shearing plains, one that had cost him time, but preserved his craft's formidable weapons. Neural tendrils lashed out from Voran's vehicle, crackling with psychic energy. One caught the edge of the Keeper's pod, sending a shock of pain through their shared consciousness. Distress, warning, fear. "Hang on," Jax called, swerving to put his own craft between Varan and the Keeper. The maneuver cost them speed, but he couldn't risk the Keeper's pod taking another hit. Without its temporal stabilizers, a direct strike might shatter it across multiple timelines again. Varan's voice slithered into Jax's mind, bypassing the craft's communication systems entirely. The human plays protector. The champion's thoughts carried a sneer. How predictable. How wasteful. She hated you at the end, you know. Your sister. I can taste it in your guilt. "Get out of my head," Jax growled, but Varan was already there, rooting through his memories like a thief. Ah, there she is. Mira, pretty, dying, cursing your name with her last breath. "Liar!" Jax shouted, but doubt crept in like poison. What if it was true? What if Varan could somehow access the reality of Mira's final moments? Deception, evidence, clarity. The Keeper's mind enveloped his, showing him the structure of Voran's attack, Not truth, but a psychic construction designed to exploit his greatest fear. The champion couldn't know Mira's final thoughts any more than Jax could. But the attack had served its purpose. They'd lost precious seconds to Varan's mind games. The edge of tomorrow's graveyard approached, and beyond it, the swirling mists that marked the beginning of the memory maze. No human had ever emerged from the maze. It constructed itself from the racer's deepest regrets, forming a labyrinth that was not just physical, but psychological. Those who entered faced not just wrong turns and dead ends, but the very moments they most wished to forget or change. For Jax, that meant Mira. Every moment he'd failed her, every opportunity to connect that he'd missed, every promise unfulfilled. "I can't," he whispered, his craft slowing as they approached the maze's entrance. "I can't face it all again." Understanding, offering, gift. The Keeper's mind opened fully to him, and Jax gasped at what he saw. The chronivore species existed as a collective consciousness, experiencing each other's lives as their own. The Keeper wasn't just one being, but a focal point for thousands, each contributing their perspective to a shared tapestry of experience. And in that moment, the Keeper offered Jax the full breadth of that perspective. 1,000 different ways of experiencing loss, grief, regret, and yes, healing. 1,000 different beings who had faced their own versions of Mira's death and found ways to continue. "Thank you," Jax breathed, as they plunged together into the memory maze. The memory maze took form around them, not as walls or barriers, but as scenes from Jax's life, projected into the very fabric of space. Each intersection offered paths through different memories, each more painful than the last. To the left, Mira's 12th birthday, when he'd promised to take her stargazing, but got called away on an emergency. The disappointment in her eyes had haunted him for years. To the right, her graduation, where he'd arrived late and missed her speech, the one she'd practiced for weeks, hoping to impress him. Straight ahead, the day of her death, his communicator blinking with her call as he focused on another rescue mission, a call he never answered. "Which way?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Purpose, direction, compassion." Through their link, the Keeper guided him, not away from the painful memories, but through them, facing each one, acknowledging it, then moving forward. They navigated the twisting corridors of Jax's regret, each turn bringing a new scene of failure or loss. But with the Keeper's perspective, Jax began to see something he'd missed before, the love that persisted through all of it. Even in her disappointment, Mira had loved him. Even in her frustration, she had been proud of him. The maze shifted around them, responding to this realization, paths opening where none had existed before. "We're making progress," Jax said, hope kindling. Warning, threat, preparation. The warning came just as Varan's craft smashed through a memory wall beside them, neural tendrils lashing out to entangle both their vehicles. The champion had taken a more direct route, blasting through the maze's structures with brute psychic force. So close to the finish, human. Varan's actual voice came through the communication system this time, dripping with malice. "Will you let your sister's hatred be the last thing you experience? Or will you withdraw from the race now?" Before Jax could respond, Varan's neural interface pulsed, and the memory maze around them transformed, no longer showing Jax's actual memories. It now displayed a horrific fabrication, Mira in her final moments, face contorted with rage. "I hate you, Jax," the false Mira spat, her voice echoing through the maze. "I called for help and you ignored me. I died because of you. I died hating you." The words cut deeper than any physical weapon could. Jax's hands froze on the controls, his craft slowing as the psychological assault overwhelmed him. Falsehood, offering, truth. The Keeper's consciousness surged forward, enveloping Jax in a protective cocoon of shared perspective. And then, with deliberate care, the keeper offered something extraordinary, the complete temporal experience of their entire species. It flooded into Jax's mind. Thousands of lives experienced simultaneously. Every moment of joy and sorrow, birth and death, love and loss, all existing together in an eternal tapestry. The sheer vastness of it swept away Varan's psychic constructs like cobwebs in a hurricane. In that moment of clarity, Jax understood. He would never know Mira's final thoughts with absolute certainty, but he knew her life, the love they had shared, the bond that had persisted through disappointments and distance. That was real. That was true. And it mattered more than any final moment could. "You have no power over me," Jax told Varan, his voice steady as he accelerated away from the champion's entangling neural tendrils. The memory maze responded to his newfound clarity, paths straightening, obstacles dissolving. Ahead, the exit gleamed, a threshold no human had ever crossed. Varan screamed in rage, his craft surging after them, weapon systems charging. But he had overextended his psychic attack, leaving his own defenses vulnerable. The maze itself seemed to turn against him, memory walls thickening between his craft and theirs, slowing his pursuit. "We're going to make it," Jax said, wonder in his voice as the exit grew larger before them. Celebration, caution, focus. Together, they burst through the final barrier of the memory maze, their linked crafts streaming into the home stretch of the death track. Behind them, Voran's enraged howl cut off abruptly as the maze collapsed, trapping the champion in a prison of his own making. The finish line pulsed ahead, a threshold of pure white light that marked the race's end. Beyond it waited the trackmaster and the promised reward. One true answer to any question. Jax's fingers tightened on the controls as he pushed his craft to its limits. The keeper's pod still tethered by the emergency collar. They streaked toward the finish, breaking through the final wisps of probability distortion. As they crossed the threshold, the trackmaster's voice boomed around them. "Death track completed. Final time, 29.8 seconds. Impossible. No racer had ever finished in less than 3 minutes. But then, no racer had ever cut straight through the probability storm's heart, or navigated the maze with the shared perception of an entire species. No human had ever finished at all. The white light enveloped them, and the death track faded away. They rematerialized in the winner's circle, a floating platform suspended above the vast arena where spectators from 100 species roared their approval or disbelief. Jax's craft and the keeper's pod settled gently onto the platform, emergency collar still binding them together. The trackmaster approached, a being of pure energy contained within an ornate mechanical exoskeleton. Its voice resonated not through air, but directly into Jax's mind. "Jackson Corbin, human. First of your kind to complete the death track. Record holder across all species with a time of 29.8 seconds. You have earned the right to one true answer." Jax stepped out of his craft, legs unsteady after the intense race. Beside him, the keeper's pod opened, revealing the chronovore's fluid, mercury-like form as it flowed onto the platform. In the arena below, medical teams were retrieving Varan's craft from the collapsed memory maze. The champion was alive but defeated, his neural systems overloaded by the psychic backlash of his own attack. "One true answer," Jax repeated, the words hollow now that the moment had arrived. He had raced the death track for this, to know Mira's final thoughts, to know if she had hated him at the end. But now, standing here with the keeper's consciousness still brushing against his own, he realized the truth. It didn't matter. Not really. What mattered was the life they had shared, the love that had existed between them, despite his failures and absences. He turned to the keeper, whose form shimmered with internal light. You saved me in there. More than once. Reciprocity, gratitude, request. The keeper's thoughts formed in his mind, clearer now that they stood face to face. The chronovore had been sent to the death track, not for personal glory, but as a last desperate hope for their species, which was scattered across fractured timelines after a catastrophic temporal event. The keeper had intended to ask how to reunite them, but had nearly fragmented across timelines itself before Jax's rescue. Jax looked back at the trackmaster. Decision made. I know my question. The trackmaster inclined its mechanical head. Speak and receive your answer. Jax took a deep breath. Not for me. For the keeper of fading stars. How can the chronovore species be reunited across the fractured timelines? A murmur ran through the crowd. No racer had ever surrendered their question to another. The trackmaster was silent for a long moment, its energy form pulsing as it considered. Then it extended a mechanical hand toward the keeper, transferring data in a stream of light that flowed directly into the chronovore's shimmering body. The answer is given, the trackmaster announced. The death track is complete. As the platform began its descent toward the arena floor, Jax felt the keeper's consciousness touch his one final time. Gratitude, invitation, hope. The meaning was clear. The information the trackmaster had provided would allow the keeper to locate and rescue its scattered people. But they would need help. A pilot who could navigate the treacherous spaces between fractured timelines. Someone with experience in emergency rescue operations. Someone like Jax. I'll help you find them, he said, and meant it. For the first time since Mira's death, he felt a purpose beyond his guilt, a future beyond his grief. The platform touched down, and attendants rushed forward to begin removing the emergency collar that still bound their crafts together. Soon, they would be separated, their mental link dissolved. Wait, Jax said, turning to face the keeper fully. Before we disconnect, was it worth it? The race? Everything we went through? The keeper's form rippled, and a final impression flowed into Jax's mind. Worth exists not in answers received, but in connections formed. We race alone but heal together. This is the truth of all conscious beings, across all timelines. The emergency collar disengaged with a soft click, and the mental link between them faded. But something remained, an echo of understanding, a bridge between two beings who experienced time in fundamentally different ways, but had found common ground in grief and hope. Later, after the award ceremony and the medical examinations, after the interviews and the contract offers from racing teams across the galaxy, Jax stood alone before the Wall of Remembrance, located in a quiet corner of the arena complex. The wall recorded the names of all who had been lost to the death track, and all who had been remembered by its survivors. He traced his finger along the smooth surface, watching as it responded to his touch, rippling like water. Then, with deliberate care, he pressed his palm flat against it and spoke. Mira Corbin. The wall absorbed the name, letters forming in the material, as if they had always been there. Not a grave marker, Mira had one of those already, but an acknowledgement, a promise that she would not be forgotten. I still miss you, he said to the name on the wall. I still wish I'd answered when you called, but I think you'd want me to keep going, to help others the way I couldn't help you. The wall had no answer for him. There was no voice from beyond, no miraculous revelation, just his sister's name, preserved in memory. It was enough. He felt the keeper's presence before he saw it, the chronovore's fluid form gliding silently into the memorial chamber. They couldn't communicate directly without the mental link, but they didn't need to. The keeper's posture, expectant, determined, said everything. It was time to begin their search, time to find the scattered chronovores, time to save those who could still be saved. Jax looked one last time at Mira's name on the Wall of Remembrance. Then he turned away, following the keeper toward whatever came next. His grief hadn't vanished. It never would. But it had transformed into something else. A connection, a purpose, a way forward. And for now, that was enough to keep racing.